We want to turn now to Aspen, Colorado. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is addressing questions as part of the Aspen Security Conference.
So let me ask you about some of the news of the day, since obviously people are waking up to the headlines surrounding the president's recent trip. We saw earlier this week, President Trump met with Vladimir Putin. How do you do?
You know, I think it's important to have that engagement. I think he's interested in continuing the engagement. When we think about nation states, there are things we can work with them on and things that perhaps we will disagree on. But I do think the engagement and finding a way to have a productive conversation is very, very important.
So how did the president do? America watched? He's clarified multiple times since?
I think he continues to work on the relationship. I mean, I think he's continuing to think about strategies, what's important, what is most important on the list, to work with Vladimir Putin. You know, Putin has a particular way in which he communicates. He has a particular goal in mind. You know, he's very interested in being a strong power in his region, in his sphere, to counter American power. I think our motivations are slightly different. So I think it's ongoing. I think it's too early to tell. You know, was it a good?
So let me ask you just for some clarity on some things. The president has cast doubt, as we've seen, on the intelligence community's conclusion that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. Even in his clarification this week, I was in the cabinet room. He accepted the findings, but he said could be other people also. So can you say definitively that during the campaign, Russia, at the direction of Vladimir Putin, launched an attack on our country and that it was done to favor the election of Donald Trump?
What I would say is I don't think there's any question in the intel community or at DHS that Russians attempted to infiltrate and interfere with our electoral system. They have the capability, they have the intent. What we're doing at DHS is to work with states to prepare on that election infrastructure piece. That's the piece we have lead on, but I don't think there's any doubt that they did it. And I think we should all be prepared, given that capability and will, that they'll do it again.
But the question of it being at the direction of Vladimir Putin last, I guess we're in July. In May, you said, I don't believe that I've seen that conclusion about the idea that Vladimir Putin directed it and that it was done with the intention of favoring Donald Trump.
That was.
Do you want to clarify?
Well, sure, because just not to quibble, that wasn't exactly the question that was asked. It was one of those, you know, specific to the intel assessment, whether the president believed one part or another. What I would say is it's government actors, Russian government actors. I think we can all draw a conclusion what that means.
But the question specifically was, do you believe that it was done in favor of Donald Trump?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
The question was that it was done to favor Donald Trump. So do you want to clarify what you had said then? You said, I don't believe that I've seen the conclusion that the specific intent was to help Trump win.
So I haven't seen any evidence that the attempts to interfere in our election infrastructure was to favor a particular political party. I think what we've seen on the foreign influence side is they were attempting to intervene and cause chaos on both sides, right? Whether it was in Charlottesville, where we saw them on both sides, in Syria, both sides. So no, I would not necessarily say that was the purpose. I think the overall purpose is to sow discord and get us all to fight against each other rather than understand who the enemy is.
But for clarity, the intelligence community did have that finding, right? Their finding was that it was in an effort to favor the president. Agreed?
It was in an effort to attack certain political parties that we know about, right, more than others. And so I think we'll continue to look and see what that means and be prepared for the next time.
So the president, as we noted, said that it could be other people also. Were other people responsible for that attack in 2016?
I think what we look at DHS when we're looking at 2008 or this year and then 2020, there are unfortunately other nation states that have the capability.
But for that attack, were there others involved in that attack, or was it Russia?
We have seen other nation states involved in foreign influence. We did not see other nation states involved in the election system meddling.
So that was Russia. We can agree.
Russia was absolutely attempting to interfere in our election systems.
The president was asked yesterday if Russia is still targeting the United States. A lot of people are concerned about the midterm elections coming up. So I guess the simple question is Russia still targeting the United States?
I think we would be foolish to think they're not. They have capability. They have the will. We got to be prepared.
You said you told some state election officials a couple days ago the following. You said there are no indications that Russia is targeting the 2018 midterms at a scale or scope to match their activities in 2016.
Yes.
Should Americans take assurance from that? And how can you judge intent, Russia's intent?
Well, I think we know their intent. Their intent is absolutely to interfere in our democracy.
But intent that it wouldn't be to match what they did 2 years ago.
But that's, I wouldn't say that. What the question was in that context was, what do we see today? It's July. So we still have August, we still have September, we still have October, we have November. I think we should be absolutely prepared to assume that they will try to interfere in all 50 states.
So what are we doing about that right now? What can the DHS do actively to help stop that? And is the president, has he met with you personally and given you the directive to make sure that the U.S. is preparing itself for an attack in the midterms from Russia like the last one?
Yes, we have had meetings with the president. We have another one coming up. DHS plays a supportive role. We have a federal lead, but we play a supportive role with state and local election officials and secretaries of state who have the overall responsibility. So I could go on in everything we do. We have a whole handbook of different services that we offer. But at a very high level, we're information sharing, we're giving them intel they need, technical assistance, and then we're helping them be prepared for incident response. I'm happy to report, and was on Saturday, that all 50 states are now working with us. In some cases, they're using our services extensively. In other cases, they're growing capability organically. And in some cases, they're hiring outside expertise. But it's a complex system. So the key is really to be very clear where the vulnerabilities are and to make sure we have redundancies built into the system.
We were talking about some of the new polling today that Daphne was saying before we got here. The latest polling from NBC just released says that 59% of Americans tell us they are not confident that the federal government is doing enough to prevent foreign countries from influencing our elections. That's a worse number than it was a year ago in terms of confidence. So what's missing? What are Americans missing that's happening? Or why should they take reassurance from what they've heard right now that it's not going to be as bad as before?
Yeah, so I think there's an important distinction there. One is the attacks on the critical infrastructure systems, which is what DHS has lead on, and that's the votes, right? We have no evidence votes were changed in the last election. That would be a marked increase in aggression from a foreign nation.
And when you say change, I mean physically, like numbers change. So not influence, perhaps,
not physically, but virtually.
In terms of the tally.
So you voted one way, and it's changed to another way. We saw no evidence of that. And actually, our goal in all of our efforts working with state and locals is that every American's vote is counted and is counted correctly. And I think that's important, both counted and counted correctly. But on the CFI, it's a much broader conversation. It's not just in elections that they're meddling within our society, right? We see that through trade. We see that through diplomacy. We see that through academic institutions. I mean, it's a broad campaign to influence our democracy and sow discord. I think the good news about that stat is, to me, what it says is that Americans are hip to this campaign now. They understand that this is a particular and very specific campaign against our democracy. So I'm actually encouraged by that number. I do think we need to do more as a government. It requires a whole of government because it's not just the elections. But I do think generally, the way I look at it, Americans have a right to know who's saying what. The what is usually protected under the First Amendment. This, again, is also different than terrorist use of the internet. But if your neighbors tell you 5 things, you're probably going to think differently if I tell you it's 5 Russian bots, right? So how do we unmask and how do we figure out what are those authentic sources for information?
On the cyber element of this, Vladimir Putin.
Right, we've been listening to Kirstjen Nielsen. She's the Homeland Security Secretary. She's speaking at a security forum in Aspen, and she was asked directly whether or not she believed that Vladimir Putin personally ordered a cyber attack on our election process in order to benefit President Trump during the election process. A couple of months ago, apparently, she was asked a very similar question. She said she wasn't sure whether or not there was any evidence to indicate that she hadn't seen any evidence. This time around, she said that, well, maybe not Vladimir Putin, but certainly Russian government actors. And why? Well, maybe not specifically to benefit Donald Trump, but she says to sow discord. So she's sort of stepping away from at least some recent reporting that Vladimir Putin personally instructed this sort of activity from his from other Russians, that he specifically wanted to meddle in the election to benefit the president. She was also asked to respond to something that both the president and his press secretary has said, that there are possibly other actors out there meddling in the election. And what she basically said was, certainly there are other nation states that have the capability, but in terms of meddling in the 2016 election, the only proof they have is that Russia did.